Hi guys, my name is Ivo from my-tested-asp.net. First, a little bit about myself. I have been working as a CTO in a large software development team for a couple of years now. Additionally, I'm a part-time technical trainer teaching modern C# and JavaScript technologies for more than 6 years. In my free time, I tend to write quite a lot of code. I'm using mainly C# and most of my open source projects are about the ASP.NET Core web framework. This video is about my tested ASP.NET Core MVC, which is essentially a fluent testing library for ASP.NET Core. It provides easy, fast, and fluent interface, mostly strongly typed, to assert the web framework's components. It has more than 500 assertion methods. It's quite powerful actually. A lot of people love it. Some companies have been using it for more than 3 years now and they're quite happy with the library. If we take a look around, in the README we can find a lot of information. Tests look fluent and quite readable. For example, my controller instance with user calling this action should have valid model state and also should have viewback and also should return view with model, which passes these assertions. If you take a look around, you can learn more about the framework. It has a lot of features and it's constantly under development. Currently it has been developed for like 3-4 years, and if you see, it has quite a lot of features. Cool. Now I'm going to show you how to use it, and the test sample is a simple block application which follows the best practices. Let me show it to you. It has a simple authentication system, the default identity system. Something was not right. Let me check again. Okay. You have, each user has an option to create an article using this form, title and content. It can see, each user can see all public articles and can see his articles. Admins can publish articles and after they publish it, they become available on the homepage, visible by everyone. The project itself is separated. The controllers are here, the data models are here, the service layer is here. We have article service, which essentially provides a CRUD operation on the article model. We have DateTimeProvider service, which provides the current time, and we have a web application which have some infrastructure code, some extension methods to make seeding data easier, to create routes for the MVC app, and we have the startup class which registers all services, the database, the identity, anti-framework core stores about the identity. It registers automapper from these two assemblies. It registers the two services I showed you. It registers the validation of anti-forgery tokens for all post actions, and pretty much that's it. The whole code of this sample is available in the GitHub repository under samples block. You can find the application tested on 100% code coverage. Of Of course, we're not going to test the whole app. I will choose 3 or 4 actions to show you what the Fluent testing library actually can do. There are other samples here. For example, how to wire autofuck, how to use application parts, how to use the full .NET framework, how to use the light version of the library, how to use the official Microsoft test application. It's exactly the same, and so on. Good. Okay, let's start with the quick start section, which essentially tells us to create a test project. I'm creating a test project, add new project, I'll write test. You can use my-tested libraries with any testing framework you like, Microsoft Test, XUnit, NUnit, it doesn't matter. The samples show how to use it with the different testing frameworks. For example, application parts uses NUnit, autofuck uses XUnit, MS-test is in the no startup project, and so on. Okay, let's return to the quick start. We need to create a test project. I will name it block.test. I will take a look what's available here. We're using .NET Core 2.2. The library supports all recent versions of the web framework, and currently the .NET Core 3.0 is under active development. It's available in this branch right here. Okay, after we create the test project, we need to reference our web application. I will delete this class. We will need to reference our web project here. Great. Then we will need to install the my-tested packages. The library is split across many packages. We have packages for the configuration, for controllers, attributes, action results, views, models writing, temp data, view components, HTTP authentication, model state, database, dependency injection, cache and session, a lot of stuff actually. If you want to be specific, for example, if you only want to test controllers and database, you will use only these two packages, controllers and entity framework core. If you want to test session, you will use the session also. If you want to test everything and to have all the available assertion methods, you just need to include the universe package. It includes everything. So I'm going to add it as a dependency, and I'm going to write that I need my tested web API universe. This. Great. We need 2.2 version because my versioning follows the official versioning of the ASP.NET Core framework. So I'm going to install this one. Okay. Accept. And we're done. Good. Then we need to change the project SDK to web. Unfortunately, with .NET Core 2.2, that's mandatory if we want to test web projects. It's not something that my library requires, but Microsoft fixed that issue in .NET Core 3.0, and there we don't need to specify that SDK. Actually, it doesn't matter. The only difference is that Visual Studio assumes this is a web project, but everything works fine, so It's okay. Then we need to include Microsoft ASP.NET Core app package. If we include it in the web framework, by default it's included, so we need to include it too. I will leave it without the app package for now, to see how the testing framework will throw an exception and tell me to include it. Good. Then I need to register my services. In the web application, that's done in the startup class. In the test project, I need to create a test startup class. This test startup class is used by the my-tested framework to register all general mocked services. You can write tests in two different ways. I'm talking about controller tests. The first one is by using global services registered in the test startup class. That's completely fine. I don't have to provide dependencies to my tests because they will be resolved using the test startup class. They are global, and it will save you a lot of time if you create your mocks once, register them in your test startup class, and then just use them in every single test. It will save you a lot of time. But if you want, you can create mock services for each single test. When I call with dependencies on my controller instance, my services will be resolved and the controller will be instantiated with these specific mocks and not with the global ones registered in the test startup class. Whatever you like, both work fine. You can even mix them. If you register global services, you can call from.services and specify the service, and it will be resolved from the global test startup services. Okay, so the easiest way to register all web application services, that's DB context, that's the automapper ones, the MVC ones, is to inherit from the base startup class, which is in block.web. This requires the following constructor, so I'm going to create it. Using this class, the testing framework will start to use it, will register it, and will register all services available here. Don't worry about the DB context, the SQL Server, the connection string. Your settings should be here or should be in environment variables, so the test framework won't access them. Let me show you. If we build the test project and go to bin folder, we won't see the app settings file. The testing framework replaces all known services with ready-to-be-used mocks. For example, if you include the entity framework package, which is already included by the universe one, the database will be scoped in-memory database, which will be very easy to use in your tests. We will see it in a moment. Additionally, all session, caching, literally everything Microsoft provides is already mocked, and you can use it directly without any concerns. Of course, if you include a third-party library and register it here, for example Redis, you should provide some test version of it in the test startup class. How to create and register global mocks? It's actually very easy, and it's the same as in the web application startup class. You need to configure test services with iService collection. It's essentially the same, so I'm going to copy paste it. And using this namespace, that's a void method. Okay, if we leave the method like this, the test startup class will not register anything. Will not register the MVC, will not register the database, it will not register anything, and the test will start failing. So I'm going to call the base class and the base method to register all services already in the web application, so that I don't have to copy paste them here. And afterwards I can replace every service with a mock. My tested library provides, using my-tested-asp-net core MVC, essentially everything you need is in this namespace. You won't need any other namespace when using my framework, and you're provided with a lot of replace options you can use. Keep in mind that you don't need to explicitly replace the DB context if you're using it in your web application. The testing framework is doing that for you. It replaces everything it knows it can replace. Of course, you can provide your own version of an in-memory database, but I doubt that you will need that. Okay. For example, I can create, because if we take a look around, I see that the DateTimeProvider gives the current time, which is not quite testable, so I would like to create a mock for this one, and I would like to say mocks. You can use some mocking framework. This service is quite easy to mock, but let's install mock. You can install any mocking framework you like, of course. Good, and I will just create a DateTime service. What's the name? DateTimeProvider. Okay, DateTimeProvider mock. And I can create a public static instance, for example. I will use mock, and I will create var mock, new mock, DateTimeProvider, mock, setup DateTimeProvider, .now, returns this simple datetime object. Okay, let's use something more real. For example, the current date. and return mock.object. That should be fine. And now what I have to do is just register this service, and I can say replace, and I can replace DateTimeProvider with the implementation factory, which is essentially DateTimeProvider instance. The other thing I have to provide is service lifetime if I want. Replace transient, scope, singleton, but since I know that the DateTimeProvider is transient, I can use replace transient directly. This allows me to replace that service registered from the web application with this mock. You can implement directly the interface, and you can, if you implement it, you can give it like this, for example. That's also okay, so whatever fits your need. Assuming this was the mock, if you call replace method, it will replace this service with this one. But since I'm not implementing the interface directly, I'm using some class to provide a mock instance, I can register it like this. Good. Okay. All mocks can be replaced here. You can write a reflection code to replace your mocks, whatever you like. Good. Next, after I create the test startup class, I'm ready to create methods and unit tests. The test startup class is required by default, so if you don't provide one, the web framework will use the web application one. If you don't like that, you can configure the testing framework to not use a startup class like this. You just need to add test config or test settings file and say that in the general options no startup is true. I do not suggest that, because if you want to test your routes, for example, or if you want to test the controllers easier, you should provide a test startup class. It's the way the framework works, but as you see fit. Okay, just wanted to say that for each web application, it's a good practice to create a separate project with separate test startup class so that you can inherit it and reuse it. Only one test startup class per project is allowed. If you, for example, skip the test startup class, an exception will be thrown, but let's write our first unit test. I will create controllers folder, then I will create a new class, home controller test. Let me see what's in the home controller. The home controller, I can find that, let's test first some easy action, for example the privacy one. Okay, so if I go here, I can add, I will need the testing framework, I will need XUnit, I will need block controllers, and I believe that's it. I will say fact public void privacy should return view. Most test can be written on a one line. The Fluent API is quite powerful. If you take a look around on the block sample, you will see that it's fully tested, 100% code coverage, and all the tests are on a single line. You can even use theories and inline data to provide different kinds of outcomes. But yeah, all tests are on a one line and are quite readable. For example, my controller, articles controller, instance with user, this user, with data, this data, calling edit should return not found, and so on. We'll see more details later. So to test the home controller, I need to say my controller instance calling privacy should return view. Easy peasy. If I start the test, I will see an exception from the missing app package. Application dependencies could not be loaded if your project referenced that package, so we need to reference that too. So I'm going to add it, and I'm going to change the test startup class to something else. I run the tests. It passes because it finds the startup class here. So if I debug the test, I will see that the web application startup class is loaded. If it can't find the startup class, for example like this, it should throw an exception to, yeah, but I need that. It should throw an exception to tell you that a test startup class is required at the root of the test project. Here it is. Test startup class could not be found. So let's return that to its previous state. Good. You can also manually create manually register the test startup class. Let me see. Application parts. You can use some sort of setup fixture which is provided by NUnit, and you can say my application starts from the startup class you want to start. Whether it's the web application startup class or whether it's the test startup class, it doesn't matter. Both ways are fine, but by default it will search for test startup class. Then if that is not found, it will search for this one. Good. Okay, so I've returned everything to its previous state, so this test should start working again. Good. If we put a breakpoint here to see whether the DateTime service is the mock we registered, I'm instantiating actually this one, so I'm going to put a breakpoint here. And if we examine the article service is the original article service because we don't replace it. There is no need to replace it since this service has only CRUD operations and I want them to be working exactly the same as in the web application, and the service is using the DB context which the testing framework replaces with an in-memory one. We will see it. Okay, so if I take a look around, I can see that the DateTimeProvider is actually the mock we created earlier, so that's great. Good. Our first test was done. It was easy peasy. Next, I would like to test something more difficult. Article controller test. I need block controllers. I need my tested framework, and I need XUnit. Okay, let's test the CreatePost method. We need to test first the action attributes, which allow this action to be called only from post requests and only with authorized users. The easiest way to do that, fact public void post create should be allowed for post requests and authorized users. I will say that my controller articles controller instance calling create. Keep in mind that this create is the get one, so I need to specify some article form model so that the C# compiler will know that I want to test this method. The easiest way is to use the built-in with. We can use with any, with default, with empty, with no, and I will just say with default article form model. This method is here just for readability. Of course, you can write it like this, whatever fits your need, but this provides a more readable solution in my opinion. Okay, when we call this action with the default article form model, which means just an empty class, the action should have action attributes restricting for authorized requests and restricting for HTTP method. You can provide it a string, but the testing framework has built-in constants like this one to give you a compile time IntelliSense experience. So essentially that's the test we want to write. If I run it, I can see it passes, and for example, if I make a mistake or change the action, the test will fail with a descriptive error message. When calling CreateAction in articles controller, expected action to have attribute restricting request for HTTP GET method, but in fact none was found. That's because this method does not have HTTP GET. So I'm going to change it. Of course, if you change the method and remove this attribute, the test will fail again. Okay, the next thing we want to test here is to check that if the article form model is without a valid model state, the action will return view with the same article. You can chain a lot of assertions. I can write and also and chain temp data, for example, then and also I can change memory cache and also should return view, for example. You can chain the Fluent API like this and it will validate one by one each assertion method you wrote. For example, this will test that the temp data has at least one entry. This will test the memory cache has at least one entry, and this will test whether the action returns a view result. But actually I prefer to have separate tests for different components of my action. So I will write post create should return the same model when model state is invalid. Should return view with the same model. Good. My controller, articles controller, instance calling create, and I will give again the default article form model, because essentially the default method just creates this class without any data. And I'll write that this call should have invalid model state and also should return view result with model of type article form model passing, and I will validate the article title to be no. Let's try that. It passes, and if you write something that it's not valid, test will fail. Here it is. Expected the action to have valid model state with no errors, but it had some. So let's create invalid model state and make it pass again. You can use some other assertion library, for example Fluent Assertions or shouldly, to validate that the article title is not null. So let's install shouldly, for example. I will go to manage NuGet packages. I will say shouldly. I will install the latest version, and since it has a beta here, I will just write to download the latest 4.0 version. Okay, good. I will say that I need using shouldly and I'll say that should be no. Cool. The next test I want to write here is that I want to validate when the article form model is with valid model state. I would like to assert that the temp data message is added, that the article service creates the article and adds it to the database. I would like to have an authenticated user here, and I would like to assert the redirect to action method. So public void post create should return redirect with temp data message and should save article with valid article. My controller, article controller, instance. Now, first thing I would like to do here is I would like to add an authenticated user. I will need this user to have an user ID. So it's quite easy. With user, when you call with on the controller, you see all the things you can set up. You can set root data, options, memory cache, requests, DB context, dependencies, and more. And I will say that by default the added user will have test ID identifier and test user username. If that's fine for you, use it. I will use it. So I won't specify explicitly the user, claims, identifier, username, and so on. You can do it from here. For example, I can say with username, some username. The testing framework provides built-in constant for username, identifier, and authentication type. You can use them for even more neat experience when you test. But I will use the default authenticated user, which has test ID as an identifier. Then I need to call the method. The method is create, and I will need to provide an article form model. I will give some title, and in order to use constants and not copy pasting magic strings here and there, I will make this fact a theory, and I will say that I have test title and test content for my article. I will write down string. I'll go to the next line because it got quite long. String content. Okay, and I will say that my article form model has these two variables. Then I would like to test that the article service saves the data into the database. So I will need to call should have data. Data with set of article. Article is the database model, and this set should pass some assertions. First, the set should not be null because I'm saving an article, and set first or default the given title should not be null too. That should be enough. And then I need to test the temp data. Temp data is should have temp data containing entry with key, and I need to provide the key, which is this constant here, some success message. And lastly, I should say that the action should return redirect result to articles controller mine. Here it is. It redirects to the mine action. So that was this test, which has a lot more interesting features. For example, the user, it's built in, the scoped in-memory database will be here, and the temp data should be valid. So let's run the test and see what happens. It passes. Okay, if I want to validate that the database is indeed an in-memory database, I can run the method with the debugger and see what options I have here. If I take a look around in the extensions, I can see that I have only the anti-framework core options. I have an in-memory database, the built-in from the anti-framework core, and the testing library adds additional extensions to this database in order to make the database work only for each separate test to have a separate database. You don't need to manage the database data in any way. You just need to validate your business logic. The testing framework ensures that your database will be empty on each test, and it will be filled with the data you give it to it. Okay, great. This test is done. Let's test the other way around, where we actually retrieve data from the database. Let's test the O method, which essentially finds from the service, it gets articles and orders them, pages them, and auto maps them to a given model. I will go here, I will write public void O should return correct articles. If we take a look in the sample, we can see that this method is tested with a theory with different types of tests. For example, first, when we give less articles than the page size, then we give more articles than the page size, and we validate the expected count, so that we validate the paging here. Okay, but we're going to do it a little bit more simpler. We're just going to write a single test if you're curious, you can always take a look at the sample. Okay, so what I have to do is I should say that my controller should have initial data. This is different from this should have data, because should have data asserts your database, and with data allows you to add data. You can add it in different manners. For example, you can say data with entities and provide database entities here. You can call it more specifically for a simple set, for example, so on. You can specify it in many different ways, but for now I will just give some valid article. I will say the ID is 1, title is test article, content is test content. I will say that this is public, so that the article service will find my article, because by default it includes only the public ones. And usually I would write data classes like this one, which provides the article test data. Get articles with some options. Give me count articles with the ID, with the title, content, public, published on, user, and so on. But we're going to, for the sake of the sample, we're going to use a simpler version of that. Okay, article controller test is public true. I will say that this is published, for example, last year. I will need to provide a user, so I'm just going to write a user with test user identifier and username, test user username. Good, that's the data I would like to test this action with. I believe I don't need to provide anything else here. This action is async, that's not a problem. I just need to say calling controller.o, and I will need to provide a page. I will say that the page is 1, and then I will say that the action should return view result with model of type. The model here is article listing view model, so I'm going to use that. And I'm going to write down some assertions on the model. So the model should pass that the page should be 1. The articles should have is the articles.count should be since I'm adding only one article, I expect to have only one article, and model articles first or default article dot id should be 1 again, like the id provided here. So essentially I'm saying if my controller is tested with this article data and the first page is code, it should return a view result containing one article which ID is 1. Everything passes. If I say that article is 2, oh, I'm not, should not be no actually. So if I call the test with ID2, I should receive an error from shouldly. Here it is. It tells me that should not be no but was, and first or default failed. Yeah, that's right, because my database currently has only one article with ID 1. If we run all the tests, you can see that this database and this database have different state, and each test have a different database storage. It is scoped for the database, for the test, and only during the test. So that's quite cool. Good. Let's see what else to test. I believe that's enough from the controller tests. Let's write down some route tests, and pretty much that's it. You now know how to write tests with the easiest testing framework for ASP.NET Core. I will say that I would like to assert, for example, the articles controller. I will assert that the edit page, for example, the get edit is routed here. Okay, so at equals route articles route test. I just noticed that this quest should be called like this. It should be in plural form. Articles route test. Again, I need using block controllers using my-tested-asp.net core MVC using xunit. Great. Public void get edit should be routed correctly. My routing configuration should map, and I can provide a string here. I can provide a string here, but since the edit, let me first test the details action. So articles controller, when I call articles slash details slash 1, this should be mapped to article controller details 1. testing framework validates everything: the action name, the controller name, the root data. If you have query strings, you can validate them too. Everything is asserted so that you will be sure your routing works correctly. Good, this route works. If I say that the route is articles details 2, I will see that the route fails. Expected route articles detail 2 contain root value with ID key and the provided value, but the value was different. So essentially it needs to be the same. And let's do, for example, the CreatePost form model, this one. So what I can do is post create should be routed correctly. Okay, what I can do here is I can say my routing configuration should map request with location slash articles slash create with method http method post to articles controller CreateAction with any article form model, I believe. With any essentially tells the testing framework to ignore the root values associated with the article form model. Let's see whether this test will pass, but it will not. And that's because expected route to match the CreateAction, but action could not be invoked because of the declared filters. You must set the request properties so that they will pass through the pipeline. The route assertion needs to execute all action filters in order to validate whether the action is actually callable. So if I don't provide the unauthenticated user, this route is essentially not callable. This action will not be called. So what I need to do to do here is write with user. So with location, with method, with user. Good. Let's run it again. And it fails again. The same reason, but this time it's a little bit more tricky. And the tricky thing is that we're essentially adding an anti-forgery token filter to all post actions. So in order to make this test pass, I have to write with anti-forgery token, which is provided by the testing framework, and calling it now. All the filters should be fine and the test should pass. If you would like to assert the article form model binding, you can do that. You can, for example, here tests. You can say that you want to add form fields like this. I would like to have a form fields title and content and I would like they to be matched by the model binder to this title and content. You can do that. If you like, you can also provide JSON body, whether it's a string or an anonymous object. That's for API scenarios, so you can assert that too. But if you only want to assert that the post / articles / create method will reach this action, you don't need to validate the model binding. You can take a look here for even more samples, how to test controllers, how to test controllers as unit test with explicit mocks. The route tests are here too. You can validate only the mapping of the action, whether the route hits the action, and you can validate the model binding too if you like. With form fields, with query string, with whatever you like. The request allows you to be quite specific. Good. I believe that's all for this tutorial. If you need more samples, you can always look at the readme file and in the samples block. Here the block is fully tested, so there are a lot more tests written, and all of them are on a single line, which is quite cool. Thank you for being with me. I'm really grateful that you watched this video with me, that you watched what framework I have been building for the last 3 years. If you like the video, hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment, share it with a friend. You can take a look around, you can start the repository or download the source code, try to contribute if you like. Some people are volunteering currently, of these cool guys, and are regularly fixing issues because I'm having hard time sometimes to fix everything, but the team is growing, so if you would like, join us. And additionally, if you like this channel or if you like my work, you can support me on Patreon and you can support me on Open Collective. Some people already did that. I will be quite happy if you support me with whatever you like. It may be a single like, it may be a single star on the repo, it may be a single share with your friend, or if you really believe that this testing project is doing great job, you can take a look at my Patreon page. That's it. I hope you learned how to use the framework, and let me know if you want any feature requests. Bye.